Welcome to Salvage, a podcast for conversations with artists about the repurposed materials they use in their art practice. Welcome to another episode of Salvage. This one is going to be a little different. Please enjoy my conversation with Vivien Zepf. Vivien is a good friend of mine. We've been friends for a very long time at this point. We discovered each other through a journal quilt book published by the International Quilt Festival a long time ago. I was perusing the book and saw Vivien's work and saw that she was just a town over from mine. So I reached out, and next thing I knew, we were good friends and even shared a birthday. Vivien has been with me through thick and thin when we lived 2 minutes away from each other, and remains a good friend and a confidant even now when she's living practically on the other side of the country. Vivien is an artist whose creativity comes through as an art quilter, which I secretly hope she'll return to someday, and as an amazing wildlife photographer. Her attention to detail and composition is astounding. She worked for 10 years as a museum docent and became a remarkable art educator. She is so good at engaging and conversing with the public about ideas and learning. She is frequently writing book reviews for Surface Design Association, which show off her skill and love of writing. And as a volunteer trainer at the Teton Raptor Center, she has the opportunity to introduce people to raptors, a position that combines her love of nature and education into one. As I've been thoroughly enjoying interviewing artist guests on this here podcast, I came to realize that most of you don't really know who I am, much about me, and why am I doing this? So as I wondered about how to introduce you to myself better, and I'm not so great at talking about myself, I thought, why don't I ask Vivien to interview me, as I know that she'll be the one asking most insightful questions. So here we are. Thank you, Vivien, for being here today.
Oh, Natalia, I'm honored. I'm getting choked up hearing that that introduction. Thank you. It's so kind of you to say. And as I was preparing these questions for you today, I was thinking back of our practice. I don't know if you remember this, where we did um, monthly prompts and we were creating our own things. And at one point, we were even doing found objects. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
You were very good at it. You were always on time. I was always a little, haven't quite finished it quite yet, but this is my idea. We've been talking art and for a long time, a couple of decades now, I believe.
I think so.
And it's just been a pleasure to get to know you more and to see your evolution as an artist, to share in life experiences together, weekly walks with dogs,
Oh,
all these
how I
things.
miss those.
I do too. I do
Those.
too. I do too. We solved a lot of the world's problems if only they would listen,
I
right?
know, really.
So I'm honored and thrilled to be able to do this with you, and I'm sure all your listeners will appreciate getting to know you better, and understanding, how your mind works, which I think is actually a pretty fascinating thing, and still a mystery to me in some ways. So I figured we would start with just how your art practice began. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey as a creator, in all the forms that it has taken?
Well, sure. Well, I was always a kid who was drawn to art. I loved to draw, doodle, whatever. My favorite class in school was always art class. Um, and then somewhere along the way, well, I found myself at the High School of Art and Design. It's a really great specialized high school in New York City, and I was living in Queens, and I just could not picture myself going to my local high school. There was nothing wrong with it. I just desperately wanted a different experience. And thankfully, my parents didn't object to it. So I applied to the High School of Art and Design and wound up going there. And I was just actually talking to a friend of mine who teaches there now. And it was just such a great place to learn about art. Like the first freshman year, we got to do 6 weeks of every single subject. So I got to try architecture for 6 weeks. I got to try photography for 6 weeks, painting, fashion illustrations. I can't even remember all the subjects that were there, but I got to try each one for 6 weeks, which is, a good amount of time to try something and see if you have a knack for it or a liking to it. I was very fascinated with the fashion world, so I majored in fashion illustration, then applied to Pratt and I became a fashion designer. I got a degree in fashion design. That's my BFA. So Bachelor of Fine Arts, but in fashion design with a painting minor. So
That's no
very
need to qualify it. That's really cool.
well, it is. It was minor because, I really enjoyed it, but that wasn't my main focus. Yeah, so I went on to be a fashion designer. However, specialized as still being an artist. I did think of myself as an artist back then. I wound up working in the mass market fashion industry. It kind of happened that way. One of my teachers was working for a company called Gitano, if anybody remembers Gitano jeans. And he frequently hired students as freelancers when he needed extra help. And this was a big office. There was a lot of designers there. So I was one of those. And then eventually I wound up with a full-time job there, which was great because, hey, I was earning money and I was expressing my creativity in, a gazillion ways. Um, that's where I learned collage actually, because I was
Oh,
doing a lot of collage work, preparing all these inspiration boards for other designers, because when you're starting off, you're doing all sorts of small things for everybody in the company. So,
right.
um, so that was really a lot of fun. But that is also where I learned eventually about well, the stress of the fashion industry. Holy smokes, talk about pressure. And that was then. I think it's even worse now. Um, with getting the line out, the spring line out 2 years before and all of that. And in mass market, it was all about where can we save a penny here and a penny there. It was really like, the money in the end was the objective is how little can you spend on a garment. And by the time I left there, I had been there for 10 years and I got to travel to factories and overseas and really saw it from many perspectives and I wasn't happy with it, I was just like
Right,
this was just so draining, when you're trying to design something that looks really pretty or, really appropriate fashion wise, and then you have to like dumb it down because it's too expensive the way you want it to look.
right. That is a hard choice
Yeah.
because it's no longer the creative process. It's a financial process with a creative twist.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's tough.
Yeah.
That is hard. So when did you, in 10 years, you said you were there. What happened next?
Well, I decided I had enough. And by that point, I've worked at several different companies and I was freelancing. That was a big thing. Yeah, you just do sort of jobs on assignment here and there, depending how many hours or whatever, and you're working for different companies. So I had some free time in my freelancing, and I did some digging, and I realized that I really was interested in costume design and in film and television specifically. And that was a booming thing at that time in New York City. It was a very, film and TV industry was thriving, and I was very curious about it. And I had taken some costume design classes, back in school, so I was really interested. So I looked into it, and I decided that that's what I was going to try to do. So I did.
Wow, that's so
Yeah.
cool. I mean, it's I give you credit, really being able to evaluate and do some honest self-reflection and then being able to pursue something that's quite a talent. I mean, a lot of people can't actually figure out what they want to do. So I want to go back to that because it seems like you're really good at that, at
Well,
looking at things and evaluating and saying, well, you know what, I'm really interested in this and pursuing it. And I think that that's a really interesting thing to hear that that was already part of your artistic practice so early in your career as an artist. Though I know you said you were an artist since you were a little kid, but I'm talking professionally more
yeah,
as opposed to personally.
yeah.
So that's so you were able to make that happen. So how did that manifest itself?
Well, this is one of those things I have to say, I'm still young. I don't have children. I can do things, and my parents were very supportive. I lived with them. That was a huge savings. So I was able to do things that didn't earn me any money for living at first. Because I literally went to the NYU film department and put up flyers giving up my services as a costume designer for the I guess for their master's thesis, for the film students' master thesis.
That is so cool.
And
I didn't know this
okay,
about you.
hired me. They hired me. They didn't pay me, but they hired me. Um, so I want to say I did like three, maybe four student films. I don't remember now. And I wasn't the only person working for free on these student films. There were other, people doing lighting and people doing makeup and people, handling the camera. So I met other film people doing those freebie little things. And that's how I got a foothold in the film industry because, it's all about who you know. You meet someone and they're like, oh, you were good to work with. I'm going to go work on this thing. Do you want to come along? So
Oh,
that's
yeah.
kind of how it started.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And
really
then,
cool.
yeah. And then eventually I decided that I was going to apply to be in the union because there's a big film industry that's based all in the unions. And then there's now I can't think of the word for it, but there's a specific word for it. But there's sort of the starter set film industry. I can't remember the word for it, where you're just learning. And then if you want to work in the big time films, you have to be in the union. So I took the union exam for costume designers and for wardrobe supervisors because I realized that it would be a lot more difficult for me to get a job as a costume designer or even as an assistant costume designer. Was a little easier to get the supervisor jobs because you're on set and you're supervising, making sure that everyone is dressed correctly as opposed to designing what they were dressed in. And I
Mhm.
have to say, I enjoyed both. I enjoyed both thoroughly because being on a set is exciting. It's
I'll
fun.
bet.
You're part of the whole creative atmosphere of everybody trying to create the director's vision. And, in real time, there's a lot of hurry up and wait, but it was exciting and nice. So I got to do both. I got to costume design some films. I got to be an assistant designer more often, and I did a lot of wardrobe supervision as well.
Which is something that you then later on carried into a passion for some of your children's plays.
Yeah, I continued my costume design
You
for
did.
children's plays. Yes.
You did. And, I always marveled. You'd go to, the Salvation Army, or you'd go somewhere, a secondhand shop, and you'd come home with these old coats and linens and tablecloths, and you would just transform them into these marvelous fairy tale costumes that were just magnificent. And I understand a little bit better all the work now that you put into figuring out how to make it all work, but your vision was always really cool. I always really loved it.
No, thank
It was
you.
always fun. And it was fun to see your drawings too.
I
So
enjoyed that.
yeah, no, it was always really neat to see. So you've now, in your your artistic career timeline. I'm going to jump ahead now. You're raising your family, but you still have this creative urge. And as long as I have known you, which was still when your children were very young, you were already using things that were either, linens from your relatives or repurposed dryer sheets. I remember how happy everybody was with dryer sheets, and you were giving them second and third lives as art materials, all these things. So can you tell us a little bit about how you chose to express yourself when your children were little and using all these supplies, and why that was something that you were interested in? And I'm asking a little bit as well as, why weren't you looking at fast fashion? The disposable nature of fashion, since that was something, a world that you had been in. Why did you transition? Or is it just because it was more accessible and easier to do things from the home and using items that were in your home? Can you talk a little bit about what compelled you to work this way?
Well, I think honestly, I, at that time when I started creating, I guess, art quilts or fabric collage artworks, I really wasn't thinking that far back into my fashion days. I was thinking about it as being a creative outlet. I had little kids. There's not that much time for creativity when you got two toddlers, but I wanted that creative outlet. I couldn't not have a creative outlet. And it first started with, I'm gonna decorate my daughter's room and I'm gonna make the bumpers for the crib and, I'm going to make a pretty pillow for my mother-in-law or whatever. It started off as completely for family, for decorative purposes. I didn't have time to go looking for fabrics, shopping for fabrics at that time. Thankfully, I had a lot of scraps from my previous projects. So I kind of was just like, all right, I only, the kid is down for a nap. I got a half an hour. What do I have that I have access to that I don't have to leave the house for? And, internet was not what it was now, what it is now. So
For
I couldn't
sure.
just order some fabric online either. So I think it started from that. And only later on, as I realized that I really wanted to have an art practice and I really dove into making art, not just gifts or decorative items, that I wanted to concentrate on specifically having an art practice. That's when I started thinking more about where my materials were coming from. Being thrifty was important to me. That's always kind of been in my background. Growing up in the Soviet Union, that's just how you were. Um, there weren't a lot of resources, so I think that was kind of baked into me somehow, somewhere.
Hmm.
And I really enjoyed experimenting with strange materials. I mean, from the very beginning, before I even knew what dryer sheets were made from, you know, I was combining them with candy wrappers and things because it was just fun. I wasn't thinking of the implications of that. Like, now I'm working with single-use plastic. I was using it then, but was I thinking about, how bad single-use plastic is for the environment? No, I was just intrigued by the material and I was experimenting.
Well, so let's talk about that for a minute. I mean, I think that you have a mindset of experimentation. And I'm wondering if, um, sometimes I have been guilty of looking at a piece of cloth and saying, it's too beautiful to cut. And then it sits on a shelf forever. And you don't seem to, in my outsider view, you look at everything as an opportunity as opposed to anything being too precious. So can you talk a little bit about how your mind works when it comes to either asking questions about looking at a material or how you can experiment? Or do you say, I have a vision and what can I use for that? Or do you say, here's a material, gosh, what can it do? Or is it a combination of both? How do you approach the ephemera, the things you pick up on a walk, the plastics that you save. How do you approach them as materials? How have you sort of created that mindset of experimentation and exploration, which I think has obviously helped you evolve as an artist?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I can explain this. It's just I always enjoy experimenting. I don't think of anything as too precious, but then maybe I haven't really worked with anything that is super precious. I don't work with yards of gorgeous brocade fabric that costs $100 a yard. I work with a couple of scraps of it that I happen to have in my pile, you know?
Right, right.
Um, so it's never that kind of fabric to cut into that would stop me. And I think that certainly when I was making costumes, and if I was making costumes from beautiful, expensive fabric, I would, be precious about it and made sure I measured a bunch of times before I cut into it because it was precious. But when it came to my art, I don't know, it just didn't feel, nothing felt precious. It was, I think when I first started creating art, I would have a vision. I would decide that I wanted to create something. I would sometimes sketch it out, make a couple of doodles of it, and then I would go forward with it and I would be like, all right, I need red for this part here. What do I have that's going to achieve what I have envisioned in my head? And I just go for it and just try to figure it out. And it actually winds up transforming from what I originally have in my head. And usually it's, even better than I first imagined it because I kind of let it evolve on its own. I kind of let the material speak to me and the image speak to me. And it evolves as I'm working on it. And I think for the better from what my original image in my head was.
So, I mean, so if I can summarize, which I think is fascinating, you have an idea, but you're not so rigid. You're willing to be fluid in the way that you work. And so your experimentation, while it starts off in one direction, you're very willing to let it go. And I think that you sort of get out of your own way and you don't say, well, it has to be, X. You're willing to let it evolve into ABC.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really fascinating. I think that the way an artist's mind works, I know it's hard to put into words how your creative process works, but I think this spirit of exploration, experimentation, what if is, it's sort of an inquiry and creative process that I
Yeah.
think, is pretty fascinating.
Well, I
And
just want to make clear though, it's not like I decide I'm going to make a rose, and as I work on it, it all of a sudden becomes, a whole bouquet of different flowers. It's
or a
not like
horse.
that. Or a horse, right? Like it's not like that.
Right. No,
I
no,
still will wind
but
up with a rose. It's just,
right, right.
you
But the
know,
way that the rose looks or how it's shaded or what
yeah.
materials you use, you're open to, the suggestions of your studio and the suggestions of your materials, which I think is really pretty fascinating.
Or the
It,
limitations of my materials, actually. I find
that's
a
true. Yeah.
lot of satisfaction in the limitations of my materials.
Really?
Well, yeah.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, it's just, this is my scrap basket, and these are the only three scraps of red I have in there. So what else can I add to these three scraps? Can I add some oranges and yellows and make my red a really vibrant red that, goes through several different shades of red in order to appear as a red from far away? It's that. Like what can I create from what I have without having to run out to the store? And I think at first it started as a necessity, and then eventually it became my MO, my challenge to myself. This is how I work. We'll just, will I never go to the store? No, of course I'll go to the store, but
Right, right. So when you're talking about the limitations of your materials and the things that you might add in as you're creating whatever it is that you're describing, is there some way that you look at things and say, actually, I think I'm going to use stitch here versus, how many layers are you willing to put in together? And I imagine it's infinite, although you don't have an infinite number of materials, obviously.
No.
But, part of what I think is fascinating in looking at your artwork is that your artwork is clear and crisp. It doesn't get muddied
Hmm.
by layers of things. And I think that that's a really, how do you know when to stop? It just intuitively comes to you.
Yeah, yeah, I think the artwork tells you when to stop. Either, yeah, it's kind of like you just reach this stage, whether it looks good, I'm happy with the way it looks. I could add some more over here, but then it's going to take it into a whole other direction. So maybe I better stop now. Or, I usually work in a series. I jump between a couple of pieces because I reach a stage with one piece going, I'm not sure if this is working. I'm not sure where to go. So I'm going to go work on this piece over here because I know where that one is going and I'll get back to that one. So it's kind of back and forth. I'm never working on just one piece. And then, yeah, I think the piece itself just tells me, or sometimes, to be honest, I'm like, all right, I'm done. I'm tired. This is this is how it's gonna look because I'm done and I want to move on to that next thing.
Right, right. Well, it's sort of like sometimes in photography, they tell you sometimes try not to edit your photos within a very short time of taking the photo because you're still emotionally attached.
Mm.
So you take a break to allow yourself to look at it with fresh eyes without being, oh, but I just spent so much time on it, or you've divorced yourself from the emotions so that you can actually look at it with
Yeah.
clarity.
Oh, and
Um,
that's something that I use a lot. Like if I'm tired and things are not, you know, whether I'm tired of the piece that I'm working on or just tired in general and things are just not flowing, you got to get up and you got to walk away and then look at it with fresh eyes, whether it's an hour later, the next day, or even 2 weeks later, whatever it is. And then it gives you a whole different perspective and be like, oh, that part is not so bad. I'm okay there. Here, I need to do this now.
do you ever just take a photograph of something from a distance so that you get a different perspective on
Yeah,
it to
yeah,
evaluate?
yeah. I actually sometimes will just even look through it through my phone screen. Um, because you're seeing it smaller, so you just get you
Mhm.
kind of see what pops more when you're looking at it smaller.
Yeah, it's a condensation of the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about subject matter, if you don't mind, just transitioning a little bit. You started, um, with New York and your love affair with, buildings and architecture, some of which were historical buildings, from the Soviet Union, some of them from the urban landscape in New York City, driving around, taking pictures of water towers and fire escapes. And now, more recently, you're doing more of the natural environment. So can you talk a little bit about where you're getting your inspiration and, how that transition has happened?
So I think eh, from the when I first started working with plastics and I was creating those New York City landscapes specifically, I also started educating myself about plastic. Um, I started learning, what it is, how it's made, and then of course, eventually that took me to of what it does to the environment, plastic pollution, pollution in general, it just took me down into a rabbit hole of learning more about my materials. And as I started learning more about that, I'm also starting to notice the trash on the street, whether it's, a plastic bag stuck in a chain link fence or just a wrapper somewhere. And eventually I started collecting more of the squished bottles and bottle caps and tattered plastic, and it started attracting me. Um, Visually, like I don't know what it is, but I've always been at the same time attracted to the visual of it and disgusted by the visual of plastic bags trapped in trees flapping in the wind as I'm driving along the highway. Like
Hmm.
it's a dual thing for me. I hate to see that it's litter and that it's pollution and that it's dirtying the landscape and making some bird's nest unlivable, or someone is eating it and it's terrible and it's disgusting. And at the same time, I am visually attracted to the way it's flapping in the breeze. There's
Hmm.
just, there's a beauty to the way it flutters and moves. Um, do you remember that movie? Oh, what the heck it was called? With Kevin Spacey. Oh, was it American Beauty, I think?
Where with all the roses and the young student and the
Yes. But
okay.
there was a scene there, and it was the boy. I don't remember. I actually don't really like. I know Kevin Spacey got canceled and all of that, and I don't really remember the whole plot of the movie, but there is a young man in the movie, and he takes videos of things, and he shared this one video with the girl, and it's a video. He filmed a plastic bag flopping around in the breeze in some alleyway. And that's
Mhm.
all the video is just this plastic bag being moved by the breeze. And for some reason, that image is like stuck in my head. Like I really responded to that image. I don't know. Maybe we
Interesting.
need to psychoanalyze that. I don't know. No, let's not do that.
No, 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 but I mean, well, I'm thinking about, I mean, there are things that can be upsetting that are also beautiful at the same time, and that's just what you've described. I mean, it's, there's a motion. So, I mean, I think that there's an interesting juxtaposition that in your artwork, and maybe this is part of what, if I'm going to psychoanalyze you for a moment here, you're looking at this inanimate object that's so detrimental to nature that's animated somehow by the breeze.
Hmm.
That's a real fascinating duality. And who's nature's planted the tree, we've planted the plastic. I mean, it's all pretty interesting. And I think that it's really fascinating, at least when you look at your artwork from my perspective, that you see, plastic in an urban environment. And I can, that jump to using that as a material is very obvious, but I think it's really unique and interesting that you choose to use this really environmentally dangerous material to talk about the beauty of the world. And I think that that's that duality that we're talking about, that image of the plastic and the tree. I mean, that's how you're expressing it in your artwork. I think it's interesting from my perspective that you've added 3 dimensions now to the way that you're expressing your artwork. So, can we talk a little bit about how you have transitioned in some of your installations from a 2D installation, where you might have a linear landscape of a fire escape, for example, draped from the ceiling, to now you have these hothouses and greenhouses filled with plastic flowers, or you have an installation where you can, follow the brook along the path of a patio that then leads you to a waterfall and walls that are covered. Can you talk a little bit about how you're incorporating 3 dimensions into your art practice?
Well, it's just that I find it exciting. It's the challenge of like that brook you were talking about. It was, you know, I was invited to make an installation in an atrium, and it's just to me it was the excitement of like, all right, how am I going to fill it? With what am I going to fill it? I want to stick to my use of single-use plastic because that is my material of choice. And the reason I use that material is because I want to make people aware of just how much plastic there is, but I'm also making it beautiful and I want to make something extraordinary, something that maybe somebody else wouldn't imagine being made out of this. So it's the challenge, it's the excitement of the challenge of how to make something unexpected.
So and I mean, I think it is also interesting to somebody who sees an image of your artwork from far away, and then you get closer and realize what it's made out of. So what lessons are you trying to teach people? What things have you perhaps learned in your self-education, your self masters in plastics awareness that you've achieved? What are some of the messages that you hope people gain from your art practice? Is it specific to a particular piece or an installation? Is it just that you're hoping that people have a greater awareness, like you said, of how ubiquitous plastics are? What other things, or what are some of the things that you're trying to tell people when they look at your art?
Well, I want them to know about the fact that plastic pollution is a major cause of climate change. I want them to know that there's too much plastic in our world. And I want people to know that greenwashing is a huge problem, that, the fact that these companies that are making this plastic are telling you that it's recycled is just a complete lie. That only, I think, 5% of worldwide plastic actually gets recycled. Um,
Wow. I didn't
I,
realize the number was that low.
yeah, it's really, really low. I think most people listening to this podcast probably know that plastic is a fossil fuel derived product, but the fossil fuel industry thinks of plastics as its savior, to be honest with you, because eventually we are all going to be transitioning to wind energy and sun energy and all of that. So the companies that are digging up the oil from the ground and making, gas and all of these things, they know that their end is coming. So they have decided that plastics is their transition industry. Um, Everything is made out of plastic these days. And some of it is necessary. I totally, I understand, especially in the medical field, you need all those disposables there, but there's got to be a way to control that as well. All right, I'm getting on my soapbox.
No, I mean, but this is part of what your passion is, and this is why you've chosen this material. So I think it's important to understand what you've learned and how you're expressing that passion and concern for the planet, for all of us in your artwork. I think that that's important to hear. So
No, yeah. No, I want people to know that there's like a whole bunch of plastic gyres in the Pacific Ocean and plastic is floating and you can't get away from the articles about microplastics, that it breaks down and it's in our brains, it's in our placentas, it's everywhere now. It's in the clouds, it's everywhere. And what is it doing to our bodies? What is it doing to bodies of animals? It's not good. It's
no,
not good. And we all need to be aware of it. And we all need to help pass legislature to control it, um, to put laws in place to stop it from being such a major pollutant. We need to elect officials who are willing to support, the plastic packaging reduction bill or and whatever else. And what in every city and country and county, there's all sorts of people who are fighting to curb plastic pollution, and we need to support them in every way that we can. So that's what I want people to know when they see my art and they realize it's made out of plastic. But at the same time, I am attracted to the plastic as an art material. And I want to make something that is visually pleasing and intriguing. And it's the visual that will first make someone look at it, and then I can rope them in and wind up having a plastic pollution conversation with them.
There we go, perfect. But this is, I just out of curiosity, we sometimes people feel disheartened by what's the impact one person can make in such a massive global problem. I'm just curious, have you ever tried to measure or weigh how much you have gathered for your materials on an annual basis?
No, I think that would be a little scary.
I think it would be sort of compelling to say, gosh, you know, plastic bags don't weigh very much, but in 1 year I had this many pounds of plastic bags and this much amount of trash.
Yeah,
And that one person can gather that much debris from the environment. Sort of be an interesting experiment.
it would be. I don't think I have time for that.
No, I know. No, I would just, it'd be sort of, I was thinking somewhat, like a Felix Torres Gonzalez who, created all the installations that were very contemporary, where, like the pile of bazooka gum that's somewhat compared to, Vietnam War and death. And, what's the weight of our impact?
hmm
It'd be sort of an interesting.
It would be interesting. I think in my Instagram bio, I say something like 10,000 bags saved from the ocean or something like that. But it is a made up number. But I think that I have probably come close to 10,000 bags. Uh,
Over all the years, for
for
sure.
over the years, I probably have.
For sure.
Yeah, I don't know that I can go there.
So I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I'd rather be making it instead of, weighing.
Yeah, 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 no. Well, I mean, it's sort of cool to say, I've filled up this many size boxes this year. I mean, certainly you have unfortunately, you have an endless supply of materials,
Yeah, yeah.
which is sort of, so what does your studio look like? For anybody who doesn't understand how you work and, you're not using anything kooky, you're using regular, normal equipment for the most part to create your artwork, aren't you? I mean, it's not like you've got some specialized, you know,
No, I don't have any specialized machinery. I mainly use a sewing machine. I use glue. I use hand stitching. I do work with resin. It requires some silicone molds. So no, I just have very basic. My studio is pretty small. I would say it's about 10 by 10, but my ceilings are nice and high. They're probably close to 20. Well, maybe they're not 20 feet. I don't know, 15 feet, something like that. I haven't measured. I'm not into measuring. I just wing things.
that's your gift. That's not my gift. So let's talk a little bit about, you've just talked about your studio space, and I know you've created everything from outdoor installations to the artwork for a seed packet to the design for a casino ceiling. Can you talk a little bit about the different ways that you've been able to get some of your artwork out there and the different things? I mean, I think some of this is just fascinating.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
I got the picture that I've seen of your casino. It looks like stained glass. It's
Well,
just remarkable.
so that's a little bit of an illusion because the artwork that I created for the casino ceiling, I think it was 24-inch circle. It
Wow.
was a small artwork that they then scanned and had printed on vinyl, and that's what's on the ceiling. So it's my artwork enlarged on the ceiling of the casino. So
That's
it's,
really cool.
yeah, I made a 24-inch circle and they blew it up into a 24-foot circle or maybe even larger. I can't remember now. So that's that was a commissioned artwork. The seed packet as well, that was a commissioned artwork I made. I think I made a 12 by 12 artwork, and then well, they actually scanned it and made it smaller for the seed packet. So it was the other way.
Right, right. It goes both ways, I guess.
Yeah.
You also have all these installations that you've made, things that people can walk through and can enjoy and touch, I wonder. I
Yeah,
mean, do you
they
encourage
yeah.
people to touch them? And you've also done things where it's not solely your artwork. You've encouraged the community to participate. Do you want to share a little bit with about how you've encouraged the community to be part of your installations and your artwork?
Most of my installations, I have always asked the community to help me collect the materials for it. Whether I'm making a gigantic garden or, that river or whatever. Sometimes I'm asking the community to collect supplies for me, such as I need blue and green bottle caps and plastic of all sizes in blue and green. Help me out. And people do. People will collect things for you. Or like all of my flower installations, I asked people to collect plastic for me. I would ask people to cut some plastic from their home into some petals for me.
Mhm.
And people do that. People are so generous. And then they also, instead of just cutting it into petals, they will make flowers out of it and send me the flowers for my installation. So the generosity of other artists online is really quite incredible. I love that so much. That has been a really fun thing for me because a lot of times when I'm making an installation like that, I'm on a deadline and I can only make so many flowers in the day. So when other people are contributing, it makes for a more interesting installation because then there's so many different ways of making plastic flowers and so many different plastics, and the variety becomes so much more than it was me making them. And the volume becomes so much more. And sometimes the volume of the one thing, a simple flower, when there's 10 of it, it becomes some one thing, but when there's 1,000 of it, it becomes something else. So
Right.
the impact of the art becomes a lot more. So I love being able to include the community in something like that. Right now, I'm actually doing something completely different with the community, and it's
Uh-huh.
really exciting. In my Repurposer Collective, we are making a collaborative project. So I designed a a really long and narrow image, which I made from images of the planet from space, from NASA and I think Britannia images, and it's my own pictures of clouds and waves. And I created this image and I broke it up into sections. And the members of Repurposer Collective are, everyone is creating at least one section, whether it's a large section or a big section. We're going to put it together, all the different sections made by the different people, into one 32-foot artwork.
That is so cool.
I can't wait. It's gonna be really interesting because I had already, some sections have already arrived, and it's the same imagery, but they're all just a little different and they're using different repurposed materials. So it's going to be, I can't wait to see it all together. It's going to be very exciting. But that's a different type of a collaboration with the public that I'm really enjoying. And I mean, it's not with the public out there, it's within a community, but still, it's
When will that be unveiled?
October 4th at the Unison Art Center.
Wow, that's really, really cool. So would you like to share more about what you do within your Repurposer Collective and what that community is like?
Oh, sure. I am biased. I love the peeps in my community. They are from all over the world. It's still a small community, slowly growing, which is just perfect, because we all get to know each other. We meet on Zoom once a month,
Uh-huh.
for a regularly scheduled programming. And whether that's, I have a guest artist who comes in and talks about their art practice, or I do something, that I talk about something that I have seen or have done or whatever, or we just share what everyone is working on. We do that once a month, but we also have these, I call it the co-work circle. So I just, pick a 3 hour block of time when I know that I'll be in my studio, and I turn on Zoom and whoever pops in, pops in. There's no programming or anything. We just pop in and chat. And sometimes it's been a full house and no work is getting done. We're just talking. But other times it's just a person here and there, and everybody's working on their thing and just chatting. So that's really nice. And this year we had our first, I'm calling it our first annual because there will be definitely a second one and a third and whatever. But we had our first annual exhibit.
Brava.
Yeah, thank you. That was really exciting. So we were in a gallery and it was curated by Patricia Miranda, who is a renowned educator and artist. And we had a really wonderful exhibit. And then this opportunity came up to exhibit again. So two exhibits in a year. I was kind of like, all right, well, we just had our first annual. We can't have our second annual. The year is still the same. So what can we do to make it different? And that's when I came up with the idea for this collaborative project. So we're all making one artwork. So it's not our second annual, it's just a one-off, but maybe our second annual, which will be in 2026, maybe for that one we can, include the collaborative artwork and other artworks. We'll see. We'll see what happens, but there are already plans for the second annual next year. And of course, so I'm one of those people who loves to collect information. I don't always remember where I've collected it. Like,
Where I came from my glasses. Oh, they're on my head.
yeah, no, well, not quite like that, but oh my God, that's a really interesting article. I need to put it aside because I'm going to come back to it and read it again. Or an interesting quote by somebody, or a documentary I've watched, or just a really good book I read, and I would be saving all this stuff in files on my computer. But now that I have the collective, it's all in there. So I actually can
You
refer
have a
to it
resource
myself.
library and
Yes.
a tidbit inspiration corner.
Yes, it's really it's actually quite large. Yeah, we
A
have
great
the
idea.
a resource vault. So, if you're looking for some inspiration or just an interesting article to read, there's tons of that in there. And actually now I have some members who have sent me articles as well to include in there. So it's not just my library for them to peruse, but I'm actually adding things that are from the members. And of course, there's master classes in there so people can, if they want to know how to stitch single-use plastic, there's like a whole bunch of master classes about how to do that or whatever else. There's actually over 40 master classes in there now. So all sorts
Wow,
of good things like that. But
for sure. So this is a destination.
it is, it is.
With lots of opportunity for different things that people can do. It's sort of like a vacation. I'd like to dabble. This week I'm going to dabble in information. Next week I'm going to dabble in a master class. Oh, following week I'll do a co-work. It's an opportunity to do all different sorts of things, like a nice
Yeah.
creative vacation.
And participate in an art exhibit if you wish to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really great collective, and it's exciting that you have, what I've been amazed by is just how many different people are actually using repurposed materials and all the different ways that they're expressing their desire to help the planet, and to create something out of what other people might consider trash. So, and that leads me a little bit into your practice of plucking, and how, you've incorporated this just in your daily walks. What does it mean? And where did you hear about it? And where is this adventure taken you?
Plocking is Plakking. Can I spell? And it's a mashup of picking up trash while walking, basically. Where did I hear about it? I think it might have been my friend Mindy, but there's many of us out there who walk along and pick up trash. And I think that's an important thing to do, whether it's part of your art practice or not. I don't understand people who litter. That just doesn't make sense to me. You want your environment to be clean? I don't understand it. I understand that some trash just gets blown off from the recycling can, from the garbage can, whatever. It happens. I understand that. But I think that if you're able to pick up some trash on your walk, you should do that and dispose of it properly. And I am one of those people who have taken that to a whole other crazy level, perhaps. But I am not alone in this. There are so many of us who walk along the beach or in the woods or wherever else and pick up trash and then use it as their art material. I don't expect everybody to do that. I would just be happy if somebody picked up the trash and disposed of it. But yeah, it's the experimental nature of that. Uh, for me, that's what's exciting. Do I use all the trash that I pick up? No. There's plenty of trash that I dispose of properly instead, but there's other trash I'll find something intriguing. I like my walks are in the woods, and I've been finding two things right now that are really intriguing to me. One thing is I find glass shards, and I first started picking them up because I was like, "Oh my God, my dog can step on that, and that could really hurt." And he's not the only dog in here, and there's other animals in here. I'm just gonna pick it up. And then I'm like, "Oh, look at the pretty colors." Look, this one is a turquoise, and this one is green, and this one a darker green, and look at this pretty brown, and even the clear one, and look at the shape of it. So I'm collecting those. I haven't done much with those yet, but I'm collecting those because they're just intriguing to me.
Next we'll hear that you're doing a glass blowing class and all these little shards are going to turn into like
I don't see that happening,
melt it down and turn it into something else.
but hey, never say never, right?
Sure. I mean, I have to say, we often hike in the national parks, and my husband and I are very different hikers. My husband he can look all around and not trip over his own feet. I have to watch where I'm walking. And there's a benefit to always being the person who's huffing and puffing and going slowly because I find a lot of trash on the ground. I do not use it in my art material because most of the time I'm like, oh, I really don't know where this has been. But it is remarkable that even in some place like a national park that I mean, just the other day we went for a hike and around a campsite, hair ties, the
Hmm.
little sections around the bottom but where you can pull the cap there's a little, almost like a tug that
Hmm.
opens up, those were on the ground, rubber bands were on the ground. We found it almost looked like a part of a camera. I mean, how does somebody lose a part of a camera?
Yeah.
It's amazing how many little things you can find if you actually start to look for it. It's a
Yeah.
little easier if you're always watching the ground.
Well,
Uh,
but that's how it was for me because this is the place where I walk. It's not even paved pathways. There's roots and rocks and stuff.
right,
So I have to look where I'm going, or I'm going to wind up with a bloody nose,
right.
in a bush. So
Right,
I
I'm
have to
looking
look.
down because it is rocky and it's not paved, and I'm always surprised by how much there still is, even in an environment where people are always reminded, carry out, don't disturb, and that's not an excuse for not doing it anywhere else, just to be clear. But if I'm finding stuff in places that are supposed to be pristine, that everybody is sort of invested in keeping pristine, it's only worse.
Yeah.
So you've started to experiment with resin. You had your geochromes, which I thought was really interesting as sort of a record and map of plastics in a particular environment. Um, and you keep changing and evolving because resin's a fairly new thing. So is this part of your goo stage? You recently talked about being in a goo stage and the whole notion of transformation and metamorphosis that you liken to from a caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly.
Yeah.
Uh, what does it mean to be in the goose stage?
So I think a goose stage is sort of where you're moving on from one way of working to a different way of working, but you're not quite sure what that's going to be. Like I have found myself not wanting to make my architecturally inspired pieces or my nature inspired pieces, all the stitched 2D artworks. I guess I've made them for so many years that I've sort of lost interest in them. I still like the artwork that I've made, and I teach workshops on my techniques on how to make those types of artworks, but I found myself not wanting to make them in any way. I've even tried, like to make another sample for a workshop, and I don't know, I have no interest in it at all. I am finding myself interested in the glass shards I pick up, the squashed plastic water bottles that I'm picking up, and I'm mending them, mending for no good reason because they can't be mended, obviously. So I think a goose stage is like a transitional stage. Like I'm finding myself not wanting to make pretty pictures, so to speak. Like I am not interested currently in making, large flower artworks or, or big cityscapes. There's nothing wrong with those, but I don't feel the tug to do it. There was a time where I couldn't wait to get onto the next architecturally inspired artwork. Oh, which buildings can I put together in here now, and how do I do that? That was exciting. I don't find it exciting anymore. Not, maybe I'll get back to it someday, but right now I feel like I'm in a transition to another type of artwork. I think perhaps more abstract, not representational, is what's really interesting to me now. And I want to do more installations. So yeah, so that's my goose stage. I'm
Well,
figuring it out where it's going.
mending is mark making.
It
Mending,
is.
mending is, so it's so you're intrigued by the marks we make as humans on the planet, the marks and how you're incorporating those into your own mark making and trying to create something out of them that's thought provoking. There you go.
Well, thank you. There's my artist statement. Let me write that down.
Oh, it's sort of interesting, like how you're still interested in what's left behind, but it is inspiring you in different ways and it's causing you to ask different questions.
Hmm.
So, I think one of the things that I think is fascinating in your art practice is that you continue to evolve, but all along to the same purpose and to the same end. But it's expressed in different ways. And that's the way a good teacher does it, is they find different ways to give the same message to their students. And you're doing the same way. You're doing it the same way, finding different things that intrigue you, asking different questions, but all hoping to get an answer to how do we solve this problem of plastics.
Yeah, I'm not going to solve the problem of plastic, but I think we all collectively can.
Well, then there's an awareness. I mean, I think once you asked people to set aside just for a couple of days all the things that were single-use plastic as part of a project I think you were doing with your kids, with your girls. And we were like, it was just how much you found, whether it was the the styrofoam for the meat, the plastic that was
Yeah,
encasing the meat, all the things that were, the plastic bags that you brought home your vegetable, your produce in, oh, I just bought myself some new scissors, the hard plastic that's encasing the scissors,
yeah,
all the different things, the twist ties, all the different things that were not regular trash
yeah. I think
just to build as an awareness. And it was a fascinating exercise.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's something that everybody should do just for a week. Just whatever you buy, just pay attention to what it comes in. And I bet you it comes in plastic.
right. So what are some practical things that you've changed in your life to help minimize your impact on this?
Well, the easiest thing to do is whenever I go food shopping, I bring my own bag. That's
Mhm.
number one. And even though in New York State, in theory, plastic bags are outlawed, it's not a very well enforced law. And now, now they're selling you plastic bags that you can buy, or they're giving you plastic bags that look like fabric, but they're really plastic. The companies are finding ways to still give you more plastic. The easiest thing to do is to either make yourself some bags or buy yourself some bags and bring your own bags. And that includes mesh bags for fruits and veggies. You don't get that roll of plastic that you just rip off by the apples and fill your apples in there. So bring those in. I think it's not that hard to do. You can get used to it. I keep a bag of bags in my car. They're always there.
I do too. I recently discovered one of the things that I struggled with is how do you save half the avocado or the lemon that you haven't done? And they actually sell containers where you can
Yeah.
seal them and just hold, so you're not always using plastic wrap
All right. But
or
is that
plastic
container?
bag.
Is that container still plastic though?
It is made out of plastic, but however, I have been using it now for 7 or 8 months.
Okay, but here's the other thing.
What am I missing?
So that plastic container is leaching chemicals into your avocado
Through what? Through what part?
through touching the plastic itself. By touching your avocado, it slowly is leaching out chemicals.
Even if I eat it the next day?
Probably not, but how about you use a glass jar instead?
Because then, well, I don't actually have enough glass jars. I don't
Mm.
have storage space actually for glass jars. That's
Oh,
something. So I live in a place where recycling is really hard and
mm,
repurposing is really hard because there's a limitation to even who can pick up the trash. And so all I can actually do, so I live in a smaller condo, don't have a lot of space. So that's one of my compromises.
yeah.
At least I'm not using plastic, but I didn't
Yeah,
realize
no.
I didn't even think about things leaching in.
Yeah.
I have to make sure that I eat my avocados the very next day.
No.
Don't
But
do
that's
that.
something that I've been doing. Like I've been
That's a
replacing
great, I didn't
all
even think about
the,
that. Thank you.
all the Tupperware, I've been replacing it with glass jars. And you don't
You have
have
done that.
you can save the jar from your, tomato sauce or whatever and use that. Or you can buy glass Tupperware, with plastic lids or metal lids or glass lids. You can buy stackable containers that are not plastic. You can.
I have done that. I
Yeah.
have done that, which I think is helpful. Simply as well because I think it became apparent that I was having a problem when the lids or things were just getting stained.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, it's not quite as impermeable as I thought.
Yeah.
So who inspires you as an artist, or multiple artists named
Oh
that
my
people
gosh.
might want to consider looking at and also being inspired by and reading what they do, and or other organizations that you think people should, look into, whether that be something oceanic or whether that's somehow repurposing old tires. I don't know. Who do you, you
All
know,
right. So, as far as organizations, the one I always talk about is Beyond Plastics. It's a small grassroots organization that's fighting for changing laws in order to protect us from the plastic mess that we're in. So, I would highly recommend Beyond Plastics. You can take a course from them to learn all about plastic pollution, or you can just support them in many ways. You can, meet them at your legislators' offices and they will help you draft a bill or whatever. They're there to change it from the legal standpoint, which I think is very important. And there's many other organizations that are just as doing the right things and fighting climate change and fighting plastic pollution, but they're the ones that I will mention always. And as far as being inspired by artists, every artist that I have interviewed for this podcast inspires me because they all do something different. They think about the materials that they use differently, and they all are concerned about what we're doing to this planet, how we need to make it cleaner, better for us and for our children and all of that. So every artist that I interviewed for this podcast is an inspiration. And every artist I will interview for this podcast will be an inspiration. And every day I discover a new artist who's repurposing some material that cannot be recycled, whether it's plastic or not. I've interviewed artists who are not using plastic on this podcast. There are many things that we can reuse out there. And I highly recommend reuse of all sorts, whether it's for your art practice or for your kitchen.
oh, here, I agree. So
Don't
how are you discovering these artists?
A lot of them I discover on Instagram. I still enjoy Instagram because it's just such a visual social media
Right.
platform for me. So I'll be scrolling through, and maybe because I have liked so many of these artists, so many more of them keep finding the algorithm finds them for me.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
So I know everybody go to my Instagram, follow everybody that I'm following, and then you'll learn more.
No, that's a real good practical tip. There we go. Maybe plastics doesn't speak to some person, but reusing, who knows what it is, upholstery, I don't know,
Fabric,
fabric,
fabric
whatever
is
it
a
might
huge,
be. I think be having the opportunity to see other people and how they're just transforming these materials in whatever shape or way it might be can be really, really inspiring. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think sometimes you don't know what you're missing without having some little prompt. And I think that, I think there's an opportunity to learn too, and an awareness. Here today, I've already learned I should not be using those little plastic things. I'll have to go figure something
Sorry,
else out.
sorry, not sorry.
No, no, but I mean, but this is part of what these conversations are supposed to be for, is about learning and exploring. And, it's not just one person's problem.
It isn't. It's all of us. We all have to be a part of the solution.
Where I would like to return to the notion of introspection that we talked about at the very beginning. And as you look at your practice and you consider what you've done, what are the things that you're most proud of? What are the things that you hope to learn going forward as you reflect back on your art career and your advocacy? What do you think most about, and what's meaningful for you in all of this journey?
Well, I think I am a lifelong learner. I'm always happy to learn something new, whether it's, how to use some kind of material or a new fact about something else. I love to take classes. I love to learn. I love to read, watch. I'm always curious. And I think curiosity is an important thing in anyone's art practice. I think that curiosity is how you can evolve your art practice. I think that's how my art practice has evolved. It's a curiosity. Oh, look, what can this do?
Mhm.
How can I make this work? What about that thing right there? I think that's important. And not just curiosity is not just important for your art practice, it's important for life. I think, it's just it's a good skill to cultivate.
No, I agree. I sometimes feel like I'm squirrel, going on to something
Yeah.
else, whatever that might be. But I agree. Being curious is important, because asking questions means that you're not presuming you know all the answers.
Yeah.
And I like that notion. I have found watching your art practice evolve just to be a fascinating journey for myself. No, it's such a, I feel blessed to sort of have visually the sort of retrospective of your art practice in my memory. From the very beginning, where you were covering stones with dyed dryer sheets. And I remember the candy wrappers and, all of that. And, now seeing where you are now, if you might show one of these little diaphanous abstract Russian fairy tale types of pieces, and you'd look at a resin piece, you'd say, could that be the same artist? But if you really follow your art practice and you think about all the things that you've discovered and you've explored and you've explained visually, and whether that be on your website or through your collective, it all makes sense.
Oh,
Um, and
thank
it's really exciting and interesting. So I get excited to wait and see what your next reveal is, because I can't imagine what it's going to be.
Sometimes I can't imagine it either, but we'll find out together.
No, but it's really a privilege and a pleasure. And I think that, I would hope that your listeners follow that example of not feeling stuck and continue that exploration and consider that inquiry, and that dialogue that happens not just internally, but with your materials and your inspiration, and find new ways to express themselves in whatever way that is. I think that it's really, you don't just what is it? Walk the talk the talk, whatever that
I like
saying
that.
is, you know. I mean, it's very, very clear that you're not just saying, I think people should try to do this, but you have incorporated that and embraced all of that in your own art practice. And it makes for a very exciting view of what you've done and what you do and
Oh,
what you're going to do next.
thank you.
I love you. That's why, but it's true
Oh,
too.
you too.
Oh, you'll probably cut that part out.
Oh, no, I'm gonna leave it all in.
Yeah, well, so
Uh,
are there any final words that you'd like to share? We've been talking
we
for
have been. We need to wrap this up, don't we?
exactly. We
This is
do.
going to be the
Talking
longest
for like
podcast episode ever.
Like, oh my gosh, these two gigglers.
I would just say that I think it's important to find your tribe, your community, because as artists, I think sometimes we find ourselves toiling away in our studios all by ourselves. And although I think we enjoy that, I know I do. I love the solitude of my studio and just working and working and working. But I think we also need community. I think we also need to be able to share our work with others, being in community with others who perhaps have similar interests. Maybe they don't have, maybe they're not interested in the same subject matter for your artwork as you are. Like if I'm doing architectural things and someone is not interested in doing architectural things, but we have the interest of the same type of materials for our art practice, I think those people are important to find, or just other artists who are enjoying discovering interesting things. I think you need to find those kind of people for yourself, because it's more fun that way. And
Enriching too.
yeah, someone else will always have something interesting to say that you never even considered before, and you never know who that person is going to be. So it's nice to have community, to be able to bounce ideas off each other, to support each other, make alongside of. I think it's important.
It is. Well, thank you so much. This has been a privilege. And, I thank you for letting me be part of this
Oh,
conversation.
well,
Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
for willing to do this conversation.
Of course, there
And
was
it's a nice catch up for us because we haven't talked like this in a long time.
it has been a long time. Exactly. We'll have to make sure it's not, we don't wait that long again.
Yes,
But I'm
absolutely.
looking forward to seeing the reveal, October 4th, you said,
Yes,
for your,
October 4th.
that's a really important reveal. I can't wait to see that. I'm very intrigued by all of the things that you've told us. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that works, and looking forward to hearing more about what the collective is going to do next. I have been remiss in exploring your collective website as thoroughly as I should have, and I'm going to have to do a better job of that. And I'm looking forward to looking up the resources and, you know, asking questions and exploring more. So I think that that's certainly on my to-do list.
Awesome. Good.
And, I look forward to whenever we get our next chat.
Definitely. Oh, thank you so much, Vivien.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This has been fun.
This podcast was created, produced, and edited by me, Natalia Korover. Theme music by RC Gaida. To find out more about me, go to artbynatalia.com. To find out about my community, go to repurposercollective.com. And to learn with me, check out all my offerings at ecoloop.art. Thank you for listening.